Imagine the silence of dawn in a forgotten village from the 13th century. The stars barely appear, hidden by a thick fog that covers the thatched roofs. The smoke from the fireplaces has already dissipated, and the dirt streets have turned to mud, a mixture of rain and waste. Inside, in one of the houses, everything is dark, until suddenly the scream breaks out. It is not just any sound. It is not a cry. It is not a moan. It is a scream that breaks the world. A scream that does not ask for help. It demands it, as if the soul were being ripped from the body, inch by inch. In the darkness of the hut, a woman writhes on a pile of rags spread on the floor. Her knees sink into the wet straw. Sweat runs down her forehead, but it does not clean anything. She carries despair. Her hands tremble, gripping the floorboards. Dirty. With broken nails and eyes rolled back in pain, she is giving birth. But there is no hospital. There is no doctor. There is no anesthesia. The only light comes from a candle that keeps flickering. The only company is the village midwife, an old woman with calloused hands and a gaze trained by repetition, not by knowledge. The air is heavy. It smells of old sweat, damp wood, blood. But above all, it smells of fear. There, in that moment, amidst screams and shadows, a life tries to be born, and another silently tries not to die. This is the scene that was repeated day after day in thousands of villages and castles, where childbirth was not a sacred event. It was a gamble. Women did not know if they would breathe again afterwards. That is why, before the pain arrived, many went to confession. They prayed. They kissed their oldest children for the last time, because giving birth was, and they knew it, a roulette of death. And it didn't matter if the woman was a peasant with cracked feet from walking in the mud, or a lady surrounded by servants. Pain made no distinction. Death, even less so. Labor began with weak contractions, like distant waves, but soon it turned into a storm, and the woman was swallowed up inside. The midwives trusted their senses. They heard the screams, looked at the blood, smelled the death as it approached. Yes, the smell. They said that when the blood came dark and thick, the woman would not live past morning. It wasn't science. It was survival, and the world around her went on. The rooster crowed. The logs crackled. The children slept nearby. And there, on the floor, a woman fought against her own flesh. The scariest thing? It was normal. No one questioned. No one asked. Why so much pain? Why so much death? It was like this. It has always been like this. But now, you will see. You will discover what really happened between those walls of stone and wood. You will understand why so many women disappeared without a trace, taking with them a story that time almost did not want to tell. This is the side of childbirth that books ignore. The pain that was swallowed by silence. The life that began with death nearby. How women gave birth in the Middle Ages, and why many never returned. There was no concept of a delivery room. In the Middle Ages, the place where a woman gave birth was the same place where she slept, cooked, sewed, fed her children, and sometimes watched over the dead. In most cases, childbirth took place on the floor. Yes, on the floor. In the peasant house, made of clay, wood, and straw, the center of the home was the warmest and dirtiest space. It was there that the fire burned, where the hay collected urine from the animals that came in to protect themselves from the night's cold, where the blood of the slaughtered pig still marked the dirt floor. And it was there that a woman would kneel, screaming, with her legs spread, while a midwife knelt before her with hands hardened by time and eyes accustomed to seeing life and death separated by a few minutes. There were indeed attempts to make the environment cleaner. They would place old rags on the straw. They would throw aromatic herbs on the embers to disguise the smell. But it was just an act. Dirt was everywhere. The water, in the cloths, on the nails, in the air. The woman, about to give birth, often did not have the strength to complain. She had worked in the fields until the 8th month, carrying buckets of water, chopping wood, cooking for her children. Her body never rested, not before, not during. The only thing that stopped was time. When the contractions started, there was no telling how long they would last. It could last for hours or days. And then the waiting began, the house filled with murmurs. Older women came. Some helped, others just watched. Each one brought a story, a superstition, an old fear. Some said, if she screams too much, the baby will be born mute. Others warned, if the labor lasts longer than the night, it is because there is a hidden sin. And there were those who just remained silent, with their eyes sunken, waiting for what fate would decide. Meanwhile, the woman on the floor felt her body breaking. She felt her bonnets opening them, the muscles tearing, the skin burning, and there was no escape. She couldn't get up. She couldn't run. The pain held her like an anchor. Some bit their handkerchiefs, others their own hands. Some screamed as if they were trying to expel death from their bodies. Others just cried softly, without a voice, as if they had already accepted the end. The midwife, the central figure in that theater of blood, often acted on instinct. She knew where to put her hands, but she didn't know why. She knew when to cut the cord with the kitchen knife, and when there was no more cord to cut. In the villages, they didn't talk about pain. Pain was part of the process. It was the price to pay. The woman who gave birth was not treated with pity. She was treated with resistance. If she died, they said, she was weak. If she survived, she was blessed. In the cities, the scenario was different, but only on the outside. The houses were bigger, yes, but they were not cleaner. The birth could happen in dark, stuffy, poorly ventilated rooms. The sheets were replaced with stained cloths. The bucket of water was already used by others. Women of different ages surrounded the woman in labor, each with a belief, a fear, a memory. Some prayed, others offered potions, and there were those who simply waited, for death or for life. On cold days, the body trembled. On hot days, the smell was suffocating. And the baby? It was born amid screams, blood, and uncertainty. Sometimes it was born and didn't cry. Sometimes it was born and didn't move. Sometimes the cord strangled it before it even took its first breath, and then more silence. There was no crib. There was no party. The woman would just faint, or she would continue to bleed, or she would stay there, waiting to see if she would get up the next day. Because giving birth was not an event, it was a risk. And the place where it happened, whether it was on a dirt floor or a lady's bed, didn't matter. What mattered was surviving. And in the medieval world, surviving one's own birth was already a victory that few people celebrated. With every groan that echoed from a medieval house, there was a doubt hanging in the air. Will she survive? But no one said it out loud, because back then, it was better to accept it. Death was a neighbor. It would knock on the door without asking permission, and during births, it would knock frequently. Records from the time are scarce, almost all written by men who had never set foot in a room where a woman was giving birth. But even so, the estimates are clear. 1 in 3 women could die during childbirth. In some regions, the number was even more cruel, and that was just the beginning. Because it wasn't just the birth itself, it was what came after. Hemorrhages. The woman gave birth and thought she had won. The baby was born, maybe crying, maybe not. But the mother began to bleed, and it wouldn't stop. The midwives didn't know what postpartum hemorrhage was. They called it bad blood. They thought the body needed to expel what was left, over. As the blood ran down her legs like an endless river, the woman's face turned pale. Her eyes sank. Her breathing became short, and she died. Slowly fading away, on the same floor where she raised her children, cooked her meals, loved her husband. And no one knew why. They just said, God called her. Infections. Another invisible killer. Infection. No one washed their hands. No one knew what sterilization was. The knife that cut the cord could have been the same one used to clean fish. The cloths were dirty. The water was contaminated. Days after giving birth, the woman felt feverish. She was delirious. Her belly swelled. Unbearable pain consumed her from the inside out. They called it puerperal fever. but they didn't know how to cure it. She was burning alive from the inside out. And the baby? She watched the mother wither away without understanding why. Babies that weren't born. Sometimes, the problem wasn't the mother, it was the baby. Many were born sideways, others had their cord wrapped around them. Some got stuck in the birth canal, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could get them out. The midwives tried to pull, push, massage the belly. Sometimes they crushed the baby inside to save the mother. Other times they tried to extract it piece by piece, crying as they did so. And even then, mother and child died together, one body trapped inside the other, a death attended to with silence and tears. And the morning, when it came, was muffled with, "It was God's will," fistulas and eternal wounds. But what about when the woman survived? This was not always a relief. Some were left with internal wounds that never healed. Others developed fistulas, holes between the vaginal canal and the rectum, or the bladder, that caused constant leakage of urine or feces. They began to smell bad, to be shunned by the community, to live hidden, humiliated, rejected even by their own husbands. All this for having given birth. And when the baby died, when the child was stillborn, its weight doubled, because in addition to the physical pain, the mother carried the guilt. They blamed her for having eaten the wrong food, for having looked at the full moon, for having... She argued with her husband. They said she didn't pray enough, that her son was punished, and she believed it, because there was no explanation. Ignorance was the norm, and suffering was destiny. Death was expected. Some families already prepared the shroud cloth along with the baby's layette. Others wrote farewell letters to the priest even before the contractions began. Rich and poor women knew surviving childbirth was not a certainty. It was a miracle. And even so, they kept getting pregnant. Why? Because there was no choice. The church prohibited contraceptive methods. Women were judged for not procreating, and husbands expected heirs. It was a silent sentence. You will give birth, even if it kills you. In the Middle Ages, a woman didn't just feel pain in her body. She felt it in her soul. Since she was a girl, she was taught that giving birth in pain was fair. It was deserved. It was the price for Eve's sin. In pain, you will bring forth children, says Genesis. And that was enough. The Bible was medicine, religion was the scalpel, and guilt was hereditary. The medieval woman didn't just carry the baby. She carried the burden of all those who came before. Of Eve, who bit the fruit. Of Mary, who gave birth to the Savior in a stable. Of every woman who dared to exist in a world made by and for men. When the pain of childbirth tore through the womb, they said, "It's God purifying you. It's hell coming out of you." Pain was not a symptom. It was a baptism. It was a sacrifice that brought her closer to something greater, or condemned her. Women prayed before giving birth. Many of them could not read, but they knew how to pray. The night before giving birth, if there was time, the woman would light a candle to the Virgin. She would pray on her knees, even with the weight of her belly, asking for forgiveness. She would cry in silence, begging that the baby would not be stillborn. She would beg not to die with sin in her heart. Because there was a fear greater than death, dying without confession. If a woman died without having confessed, she was condemned. And if the baby died without being baptized, its soul would not be able to enter heaven. It would be trapped in limbo, forgotten, without consolation, without redemption. That was why midwives improvised baptisms with dirty water. That was why priests rushed to peasants' homes on stormy nights. Eternity was at stake. Blood was a symbol. The church saw the blood of childbirth as sacred, but also as impure. It was a living contradiction. Women who bled were in sin, but they were also cleansing themselves of it. It was as if God had set fire to their wombs and expected them to endure it in silence. Some monks said that women should be thankful for their pain. Others compared them to martyrs. There were even medieval paintings that showed Mary suffering, with her eyes lowered without crying out, as if the pain were beautiful. And this fed a pattern. The good woman was the one who suffered in silence. The woman who screamed was weak. The one who begged was a sinner. The one who asked for help was viewed with suspicion. The midwives feared that they were witches. The figure of the midwife was ambiguous. On the one hand, it was essential. No one wanted a man in a delivery room. Priests were not allowed in. Doctors were rare. The midwife was the one who saw life emerge and death lie down. But on the other hand, she was feared. She knew the secrets of the body. She knew how to stop a pregnancy. She knew how to heal with herbs and how to hurt with roots. And that was dangerous. Many midwives were accused of witchcraft. They said they stole the souls of children, that they made pacts with demons, that they exchanged babies for children of evil. That's why they walked in silence. They prayed in low voices, and they knew that if something went wrong, the blame would fall on them. When childbirth was seen as atonement, some women believed that dying in childbirth was a kind of redemption. Better to die bringing forth a life than to die in sin, they said. Others asked that suffering purify them. It was common to write letters asking forgiveness from husbands, children, and God, as if they were about to face a final judgment. And they were. The birthbed was also the deathbed. Women knew this. They felt it in their bodies. And yet, they kept going because there was no alternative. Because believing that pain had a purpose was the only way to keep from going crazy. And if they survived? Even if they survived, many women carried an invisible guilt. They believed that they had done something wrong, that the pain was greater because they had disobeyed their husbands, or because they had questioned the church, or because they had had impure thoughts during pregnancy. Pain was punishment, survival, penance. And so, generation after generation, childbirth became not a miracle, but a spiritual ordeal. A woman was not just a mother, she was a martyr, and the blood she left on the ground was as much hers as it was Eve's. On the outside, everything was stone, walls, and power. On the inside, curtains of embroidered linen, colorful tapestries, and silver pitchers. But in the pregnant lady's room, there was silence. Silence and fear. Because not even the thickest walls could protect a woman from what was to come. Not titles. Not jewels. Not private physicians. When a noblewoman went into labor, the world around her bowed. Maids rushed in. Experienced, midwives were summoned from distant lands. Priests were kept close by, not to officiate at the birth, but to administer last rites if necessary. And often, it was necessary. The death room disguised as a crib, the so-called birth room, was prepared weeks in advance. Thick curtains blocked out the sunlight. All the windows were covered. No drafts were allowed in. It was believed that the evil wind could bring spirits, illness, or even steal the baby's soul. Low lights, scented candles, symbols of the Virgin Mary. The environment was sacred and somber. There, the noblewoman would remain secluded. Days, sometimes weeks before giving birth, without seeing her husband, without touching the cold floor, just waiting, waiting for the pain, waiting for her own womb to judge her. Doctors, midwives, and spells noblewomen had access to what peasant women did not. Rare herbs, imported tonics, university-trained doctors. But even so, no one could guarantee anything. Many doctors prescribed bloodletting. Others tried to align the humors with concoctions that poisoned more than they cured. The midwife continued to be the main figure, but now, under the watchful eye of the entire court. If the baby was stillborn, the blame could fall on her. And in the castle, politics were as cruel as childbirth. That's why some maids resorted to the occult. They drew symbols on bed sheets. They sewed protective medallions into the hems of clothes. They placed amulets under the pregnant woman's pillow. They knew, when science failed, superstition filled the void. The pressure for an heir, a peasant. Woman could give birth in silence, but a noblewoman carried the weight of the throne. The baby had to be a man, strong, alive. If a girl was born, faces would turn sour. If a stillborn child, the silence would be deafening. And if the woman died, another would quickly take her place. The queen was the king's wife. But before that, she was the womb of the dynasty. Henry VIII of England married 6 times. 2 were executed. 2 lost babies. 1 died in childbirth. The other survived. For many noblewomen, being a mother was a political burden. Maternal love existed, but it did not come alone. It was tied to pacts, wars, and alliances. Royal childbirth also bled. There is no record of a painless childbirth. Whether in a stable or in a castle, Isabeau of Bavaria screamed so loudly that her servants heard her. Queen. Joan died after a labor that lasted 2 days. Lucrezia Borgia almost died of an infection after her 3rd child. And many medieval queens are not even named in history. They died before seeing their child grow up. The golden bed became an altar of sacrifice. The crown was a burden, and motherhood a battlefield. When pain was hidden behind the curtains, noblewomen learned to hide their pain. They could not weaken, they could not scream. They had to maintain their posture, elegance, coldness. But inside, they cried, they bled, they broke, and in the end, if they survived, they left the room with the baby in their arms and their bodies marked forever. Some never got pregnant again, others no longer menstruated. Many had emotional breakdowns, but no. One called it postpartum depression. They called it weakness or hysteria, and they told them to pray. A luxury that did not save in the castle. Everything seemed safe, but it was not, because death did not look at status. It did not see embroidered dresses. It did not listen to titles. It entered the queen's room as it entered the peasant's hut. Silent, relentless. The silver cradle, the linen, clothes, the court doctor. None of these held back the breath of life. And in the end, they were all women. They were all flesh. They were all alone in the most fragile moment of their existence. Today, you can enter a medieval museum and see swords, armor, crowns. You can read about kings, about wars, about castles, but you will rarely see a woman screaming in pain on a bloody bed. You will rarely see a dead baby in the arms of a desperate mother. You will rarely see the face of the true horror that happened behind the heavy curtains of history, because these stories were not told. They were hushed up. They were not heroic. They were not noble. They were dirty, painful, uncomfortable. History preferred to keep the shine of swords and hide the blood of women. Where are the names? You probably know the names of knights and generals, but do you know the name of the woman who gave birth to his son? Do you know in which bed, in which state, with which midwife? Most of these women's names have been lost. Mothers of kings, sisters of knights, peasant women who died before being called someone. They were registered as died in childbirth, or simply ignored. And what hurts the most is knowing that they knew this. They knew they were disposable. They knew they could die, and no one would remember them. They knew that the world would not write books about their pain. And yet, they kept giving birth, they kept bleeding, they kept existing. The inherited silence. Many of the pains that women feel today still carry echoes of what they lived through. The fear of childbirth, the judgment about their bodies, the pressure to endure, in silence. The idea that suffering is a sign of strength. How many still believe deep down that pain is deserved? That asking for help is weakness? That if something goes wrong, it is their fault? The culture of suffering is not over. She just changed her clothes. It left the castle and entered the hospitals. It left prayers and entered medical protocols. It left the Bible and entered social media. But the weight is still the same. The importance of remembering telling these stories is not just looking back. It is recovering what was taken away. It is giving voice to what was silenced. Every woman who died in childbirth and had dreams. She was afraid. She had a name. Every midwife accused of being a witch had wisdom. She had courage. She had faith. Every nobleman who cried in silence had a soul. She had flesh. She had pain. And to ignore all of this is to repeat the mistake of history, a belated tribute. This video is a tribute. To every woman who went through the darkness of childbirth with no one by her side, to every mother who died without knowing if her child lived, to every body buried without a name, without a cross, without a story. You may not remember them, but they are in your blood, in your DNA, in your ancestry, and they deserve to be seen. They deserve to be remembered because real history was not written only with swords. It was written with tears, with blood, with silence. If you have come this far, know this. You have just served justice to the past. Every view, every comment, every subscription to this channel is a way of saying, I see you. I hear your stories, and they matter. Don't let this legacy die again. If this video touched you, share it with someone. Subscribe to the Medieval Whispers channel for more hidden stories like this one. Help give voice to what has been silenced for centuries, because some stories have not been told in books, but still live in the whispers of history.